Hi there, hi there, hi there, hi there, hi there. Okay, this is me, Cliff Bates. Welcome to a Friday live stream. My voice is slightly better from the my bout with a little bit of an allergy attack. Um, well, today is I'm not back at my home. I think next Friday I may be back in Warsaw, so we'll see what happens. We start I'm teaching a Norwich class on basically history diplomacy, which is basically a course on the emergence of the state and the international institution of the state and international organizations. It's basically the origin of the Westphalian system and the evolution towards the current system, the international regime. We start Monday, and it's a new system. We went from Moodle to Brightspace, and still there's hiccups. My class, they haven't populated the classroom yet. So I've kind of been a little bit anxious that we had only like basically 2 weeks of transition. We're starting earlier. We're starting earlier, and not starting in September like we normally do. So it's very strange. So a little bit of frustrated. So there's going to be, I got Warsaw University stuff to do. We come back. I finished my article. Yeah, I finished the article. Sent it to the editor early. And I have 2 new articles to work on now. 3 articles to work on. And I think I'll get those done during the September before the start of school. But then we have recruitment at the American Studies Center. We have the September round of recruitment, which I think will be like the 10th or something. Like I haven't heard yet. I haven't heard exactly when yet. I'll be contacted by the person heading it, heading the committee. We'll see what happens. So it's going to be kind of like frustrated. What else? Well, we're going to start recordings in September. So yay, new recording system. I don't know what I'm doing. I really still don't know what I'm doing. I don't really want to do another text simply because, I might rehash something else, but we'll see what happens. I might do something, different video structures. I haven't gotten much feedback from people, so it's like, so we'll be doing, starting in September, we'll be doing a whole new approach to videos, I think, in that sense. We'll see what we do. I might do a couple of readings and we'll see what happens. I'm fighting with the video system. I've been not used here like this. We had a little trouble in Warsaw with flooding. We got like basically a meter of water hitting. It downpoured so bad it flooded. It overwhelmed the situation. So water came up from the pipes and things. So there was little water, and my wife had to go back for like 2 days to address it. I stayed with her mother. She's on the board of she's on the governing board of the the apartment the association of the Wspólnocie, they call it Baton. So therefore, it was kind of a strange little hiccup this past week. Finishing my Aristotle's anthropology, in the political assumption article that I had that was due in September. I'm happy that I got it done. I'm not perfectly happy with it. It is what it is, but I have that done. So let's get to the thrust of what today's things are. I mean, I have no real schedule. No one asked any questions in that sense. I like to go over two posts. Corlitt's, one of our viewers, he's himself in his first post was I was looking at Baton's book, Pornocracy, where he argues that sexual liberation of women will lead to the establishment of a despotic regime by destroying solidarity within the family, as well as pornocracy. I started thinking about the other types of polities or regimes: plutocracy, theocracy, cretocracy, and what could be said about them in relation to modern politics. Do these concepts have a place? Now, okay, those kind of regimes are not, this is the problem, these so-called polities or regimes. People talked about them, but I'm an Aristotelian in that sense. Those all those regimes are variations of other regimes. In that sense, they're sub-variations. Plutocracy is clearly a variety of oligarchy. It probably is more one of the extremer versions of oligarchy. In other words, the more exclusive, the higher the threshold to be an active participant, the higher threshold of being who is considered those who are eligible to be on part of the Putuma, right? And what Aristotle talks about is theocracy. Theocracy. This is usually talked about Athens. Athens is called this. This is the assembly. In other words, you have ruled by the spectators. Okay. Well, this is really just the final form of democracy in that sense. What Aristotle would call the final form of democracy, or the last democracy, where everyone's, everyone, the mass, the range of who is citizen is brought beyond normal citizen, members of the community and people born into families of the community, but also include women, slaves, strangers. In other words, it is the expansion of who's a citizen is at its extreme peak. And not only does this tend to lead to the rise of demagogues, that he says, or the worst aspects of demagogues, but that this regime is the most unstable. Now, this is very much the Athenian perception of the Athenian assembly in that sense, right? The assembly, the theater, and the idea of spectators. So it is a form of radical democracy in that sense. It is that the observers, who are those are ruling, the spectators. The spectators are the people who are deciding things, not the. But the reality in Athenian democracy was the spectators were only kind of like they were manipulated by the political leaders, so that and that they didn't really make rules. That what was ruled was what was really decided was done by the council, who was elected, right? But at the same time, they were elected by the populace at large. So therefore, there is this kind of symbiotic relationship between the observers, those who are observing, and those who are basically exercising representative rule. So there again, it is, in other words, if we see plutocracy on one hand and the other one on the other hand, it is that now the cretocracy, which is rule of judges. This is judocracy, right? Judocracy. But that's a form of aristocracy. That is like, remember, aristocratic, the difference between aristocracy and oligarchy is really about that oligarchy tends to, give you the word, the problem with the word all law would be few, the word of the few, rule of the few, right? But when Aristotle says, well, oligarchy does not really mean that. It means rule of the wealthy, that money becomes the defining characteristics, money, property. But aristocracy is a form of oligarchy that instead of famousing basically mere wealth, it privileges breeding family. In other words, families that are respected, education, quality of the character family in that sense, not the necessary. So old wealth, not new wealth, um, uh, and the hostility towards money making or commerce in that sense. So aristocratic regimes, or not in the best sense, but the so-called aristocratic, are another. It is a kind of variety of oligarchy. It follows the pattern of oligarchic characters in that sense. This is why aristocracy, the discussion of aristocratic regimes, the so-called aristocratic regimes, in Book 4, the politics, is very problematic because it's he throws it out with the regime. He intersects that with the regime called regime, and it kind of just blurs everything together. Where aristocracy and democracy kind of clearly distinguish themselves. The so-called aristocracy and the regime called regime or polity, the mixed so-called. I don't really think of the mixed. Our regimes are mixed, but people talk about mixed regime. Okay, this polity argument, and this is clearly what politics for 4, 5, and 6 is the oligarchic democratic oligarchic account, and then 7, 8, and 9 are the examination of politeia called politeia and our so-called aristocracy, and it doesn't really even have the same format as uh, the account of democracy and oligarchy. It doesn't really have a clear. It doesn't offer like the clear variations. It seems to blur in together. It becomes a mess. Even the pattern doesn't really follow the pattern of that. So therefore, this is at one level a frustrating thing in that sense. That it is. He promises to talk about these regimes, but in many ways, the account of, in fact, chapter 10 of book 4 is tyranny, and it's a very it's a very short and kind of disappointing account of tyranny, and there's no discussion of monarchy or kingship, right? There's no equal discussion. It's silent about kingship. And this echoes the perception that kingships are not properly political rule in that sense. And so therefore we have to understand that what is judocracy? Rule of the judges is basically a kind of it is another form of aristocracy. It is a kind of oligarchy aristocracy of the judges. Now, who elects the judges and who the judges are. Now, this can be a problem. See, the problem is how do you define who is a judge? How the judge is selected. And therefore, that could be either the judocracy is basically arguing that the judicial body is the most authoritative. Now, this makes more sense, and to be honest with you, this makes more sense. For Aristotle, this doesn't really make a sense. This isn't, the Greek world wouldn't argue that this is a term. Now, this is the problem. This is the idea of critocracy comes really from the Old Testament and the book of Judges, dealing with the judges of Israel. In other words, the appointment of a judge who's like this. And the question is, are judges really judges? This is decider. In other words, the Greek word for kritos is this decider. So it's not a judge in that sense. This is like a person who decides. And you could call a critocracy. Now, the question of the concern of the judge of Israel was justice, righteousness in that sense, obeying the law, upholding the law, the Torah in that sense, right? So if we understand this is why we see that as judgeship, right? That's why it was picked as judge, because it was tied to upholding the law. The magistrate that is concerned with the law, right? Not the making of the law. It's not a legislator. He's judging the law. Okay, he's judging those who break the law and doing the executor of that. So critocracy, in this sense, is the problem. But this is a big problem in modern thinking because the judges regimes. This is the role of courts, judicial bodies having the ultimate say about law and about just political actions, and the fact that judges tend to be not elected by the people, right? So it tends to be an anti-democratic conception in that sense. But some regimes will have the judges elected by the people. Okay, so if the judges are elected by the people and they're the supreme decider, well, how's that not democratic? That is simply just a kind of office. The rule of an office. The problem with the rule of the office and how we normally mean it, we would normally imply that the office is being used against the people in that sense. They're self-selecting, self-appointing. Therefore, that's an oligarchic aristocratic construction. And again, this is what Aristotle says about the institutions, the end of the various offices that end up in the end of Book 4. He accounts, deliberating offices, the ordinary offices, and then the adjudicative offices. Again, judges, right? These will vary. How they, the question of who can be them, how long can they be them, and who appoints and who selects or elects, how they are elected, and who elects them, where they come from, who selects. In other words, all these institutions define the character of those offices. And therefore, the character of the offices can go either in a democratic or oligarchic direction. It can either be, in other words, you can move the regime towards, you can have Aristotle's very clear about that in the sense that his argument is the nature of all political systems are mixed because they're composed of parts of the population who are themselves have different, the few and the rich will seek towards to have, or either the few and the rich will seek to have oligarchic rule, and the many will seek democratic rule. Even the argument, even if they're wealthy, if the many are wealthy, then this will be an oligarchy still. Okay. What about the poor? The poor will favor democracy in that sense. So therefore, you have, and that's what's clearly argued in Book 3 of the Politics, right? That it's not few and many that really defines. It's wealth and poverty, wealth and freedom, right? The many who, it's accidental that the one, few, and many are the category, but it's not in that sense. It is both accidental in one sense of the definition of an oligarchy, but it's still, Aristotle in Book 4 suggests that the dynamic factor of all political rule is between the few and the many, right? This is the fundamental dynamic force within any political system, any regime in this sense. This tension, this back and forth of the few and the many, in its various forms in that sense. So therefore, this leads us to a question of judicial offices. Now, the question of the judicial the critocracy is where the judicial offices are the most supreme. They have the most authority. They trump all the other officers. Now, the danger here is, well, what happens if these offices, you have to look at the character of you have to look at the character of the offices, the character of the office to understand what kind of regime it will be. In the Anglo-American world, it's an oligarchic office. Sorry, in the Germanic world, it's oligarchic as well, but not as oligarchic. Judges in the Roman system tends to be subordinated to the law and the legislature in the ways that the Anglo-American judges in some way are not. they don't have authority over the laws. But what happens is that once you permit them to do that, they will have it. Okay, so therefore, the original idea was that they were separate. The judges were given great leeway, great authority, great autonomy to be kind of a check on the other offices and the violations, but they were governed by the law. Okay, they were governed by the law. The law was to do this, but now, as they themselves start changing the law and rewriting the law, then they become supreme in a sense. And this is the danger of judicial. This is why the concern of judicial politics is it is a modern concern. It is a concern that really drives. It is a growing concern in the 20th century, basically 20th century and onwards, to the kind of the problem of the political form that judicial rule does give us. So, is it a regime? He says that Koritz's point was, do they have any leeway in the like plutocracy, these minor varieties of polities? Do they retain themselves? And my argument is yes and no. The problem is the logic of the modern state tends to move everything towards democratic systems. But once you understand the administrative structures in this way, then what ends up happening is that judges take over judicial rule, and the judicial entity will start having more authority. So the question of what set of offices have the most authority? Is it the deliberative? Is it going to be external? In other words, this is questions that drive people crazy. Now, you can prevent, in other words, you can create a system that is designed to ensure that the legislature can never alter anything ever again. Okay, this is what, in many ways, what the Blair and Starmer's attempt to do things in England are a clear attempt to fundamentally alter the political structure by changing the law of and divesting Parliament of powers and divesting it to quangos or special organizations that are independent of Parliament and parliamentary control. And this is worse than the administrative. We can say is the rise of quangos part of what we would call an administrative state? Yes, I think it is. It is what Burnham would call the managerial democracy, right? This is managerial democracy. The rise of quangos and these independent bodies who have that the people themselves have no electoral and parliament. The people's representative agency has very little power that they're being. In other words, what belonged to the people's representatives was transferred to these bodies, and that these bodies now may be appointed by parliamentary or prime ministers, and the prime minister and his buddies, but once in those offices, there's no real move, and the people have no direct means of appeal. So, like judges in that sense, they are kind of unassailable from popular concern. The idea was that we want the judges to be not to be intimidated by the people and not to be feared. So there was a kind of the Anglo-Saxon, the Anglo-American model of judiciary was aristocratic in its character. Now, the question here was that was always limited. In other words, it didn't have legislative power. That they were there as a check against the democratic impulse to make sure that the law would be followed. But now that they themselves can make and rewrite the law, then that changes the character of the regime. The regime now it is no longer democratic. It becomes increasingly oligarchic. And particularly given that these few, it is such a few, it becomes dynastically oligarchic. Okay. In that sense, the most negative, most despotic character of oligarchic rule. So that's my kind of response to James is so. Let me do the other. He wrote two other things. Other than that, I said he wrote this other thing, and he's reading about Rhodesia. Also got me wondering about the clause because we talk about Rhodesia. His question was that about Zimbabwe and Afro-Marxism and the liberation movements themselves because they created unrealistic expectations and empowered radicals. Well, that's truism. That come on, the Marxists always promise more than they can really deliver. And once they have the Marxist always, that's not Afro-Marxists, it's all Marxists, have unrealistic. I mean, Marx himself had unrealistic visions. Look at capital. Look at that famous definition of capital where the man in communist time would be able to, that famous idyllic picture that he paints. It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. It's not possible. It's a romantic. It is idealistic as much as any aristocratic or romantic era kind of perception of kind of a ideal world in that sense. That it's not based on the actual reality of how complex, what is possible in a complex situation of different groups of different peoples with different needs and different wants. Well, that's the kind of I call it Uncle Sam's revenge, right? Africa's problem has always been its leaders, not or it's a political problem. Why Africa is not a problem of resources. Africa has never had problems with resources. If there is problems with resources, it's due to their leadership of the political elites, and that not due to anything else. And we can point to the problem of Africa as a fundamental crisis. People say, "Oh, it's the left and right." I think there was a very interesting thing that saying the left tends to blame everything on the white man, the colonizers and capitalism and colonialism, colonizing, and capitalism. Why Africa is messed up, and whereas the people on the right will say, "Oh, it's because they're lazy, low IQ." But the problem of Africa is not about. I think it's more complex. I think there is some truth to the problem that the character of Africans are derived from the fact that they had it so easy. What do you mean by so easy? No, to be honest with you, food, all for realms of sustenance, nature provides them with at ease sustenance, at ease, so that they could remain hunter gatherers in a way that would not necessarily. The problem with them was not always overpopulation and fighting between different groups and gangs and groups, and that would. In other words, the stronger ones would drive out the weaker ones, and the weaker ones would flee go across the desert, go northern Africa, which was not as not as nice. The Mediterranean region, they had to adapt towards it. Asia Minor population. They moved up towards that area to Asia Minor, across the desert, across the Sun Belt, and then you go from that to the northern part. Now, the northern part, you could develop things, but this was completely different, far less easily access to food and climate. The climate was okay, it's still warmish. You could survive, so you could stay. They moved from pure hunter gatherers to nomadic populations with following with their animals and herders. It's only when you get to the north into certain bases of plains, the development of agricultural, again, northern Africa, plains, and the delta in Asia Minor, the valley, that great valley of the Bosphorus and things like that. Then you have the and then into Europe, forests. And that's your dynamic of human evolution in that sense. Asia Minor goes into Asia. One time, we could even argue that the continents were when the American continent was connected to the African and European continent millions of years ago. There was no humanity. There was, dinosaurs and that stuff, yeah, but no humans. That was already separated. This is why the Americas are so unique. There's no, we can see in other words, what any human beings that habitated North America, they came from Asia, and they came over from the north. Okay, they came over the north down like through the Americas down. So you have a clear, a mechanism by which we can understand the development of humanity, how the flows of humanity over time, and how they adapted to their new environments. They went as hunter-gatherers. They adapted into as populations required it. When they could no longer arrest the hunter-gatherers, they ended up if it favored herding, and there's the domestication of livestock for the purposes of herding and developing. Then the rise of agricultural settings, farming, land with land property. That's the big difference between American and North American Indians and, let's say, Central American Indians. Property. The rise of property always comes with the rise of agricultural society. Private property is a product of agricultural society, the emergence of it. So people are coming and going. We see them popping in. So therefore, that's good. So Africa is a very why Africa followed up. Rhodesia, it was, if you can say, all revolutionary moments promised them too much. It was envy. That's the book Egalitarian Envy, which I forget, De La Raza's book. Egalitarian Envy is still probably one of those important books to understand the danger of envy, in that sense, that they're looking at the white sharecropper, the white farmers, and that the Marxist revolutionary class wanted to have what they had, and now they had power. They won. They were able to get advantage because the Western powers felt guilty. The Western world got guilty. They were lucky that they were confronting by the English and not by, let's say, a Nazi regime. If they actually had, let's say, Hitler won and the Nazi regime, You know, the world of man of high castle is not that it's not so nice for Africans. Okay, so we could argue that and look at the history of the Belgian Congo. In other words, ironically, it was they rebelled against the most lenient. It's the places that had the best. In other words, ironically, it was the places that under English rule that had the most development of the areas and prosperous development, but also had resentment of the Africans and who looked at the whites as envy and power, and particularly that if they weren't part of the usually the English often picked very weak ethnic tribes to be the partner. They picked the weaker partner. Um, uh, uh, Maybe out of a sense that they like the underdog, right? Typical English kind of, but that would then lead the dominant, the other population groups resentful and angry at that. So it was, again, and many of the problems of Africa and English, it's the way the English handled things. The English, come on, they fucked up North America. The English constantly mismanaged their empires. India should never have been, India should, if it wasn't for the short-sightedness of the English and the way they wanted to deindustrialize India to protect English manufacturing, what they should have done is they should have encouraged it and developed it and worked with it and transferred manufacturing and then bring new products and development over there. But problem was, this is the big problem, but this is the problem of free trade, right? That maybe the population of England shouldn't adapt to the new techniques, and therefore it's kind of hard. How do you adapt? The young man, you're just telling them to learn to code. No, nothing about that. I'm not going to be that ruthless. But there are always, there's limits to what can be done by free trade. Yes. But at the same time, we have to be realistic that if you want to keep India under your thing, and in fact, imagine England still controlling India, we could argue that England could have been in other words, England still controlling the empire. If England still had the empire and played the imperial power, maybe Africa would be not as bad. But the problem is the democratic world cannot tolerate that. They won't never tolerate that. So therefore, that's never going to be acceptable. And therefore, the national identity, anti-colonialism and nationalism play hand in hand. But the problem is that African nations are still fundamentally backwards because they retain their political, the sociological character of the society in question is still tribal. Still tribal. They have no consciousness of national identity. It's not strong enough. They have no common. In other words, the thing that is most common for them is their tribe. That the civic body, the national body, has only a fleeting attachment to their conception of what they share a common with. It's, in other words, the interconnection between the individual and family is more centered on the tribal than on the national. In other words, the national entity, the civic entity, does not have that much power over the good, the benefit, the perception of what is the thing that benefits them, and where are their identities understood. And this is the big crux of the problem of Africa, that they never, in other words, colonialism moved, in other words, They got this. They got modern technology and modern um, social structures, particularly political systems. In other words, the Europeans brought the state with them. Okay, but the African society was not suitable. It was still tribal. And what happened was there's a disconnect. You can see the same thing happens in Russia too. You had a peasant society. Your society is mostly peasant. That the Tsar prevented the rise of a civic culture, a civil society. That the civic society and civil society did not really have the size or the largesse that did it. And when the Tsar took control, he castrated the civil society, and he just ruled despotically in that sense. He ruled despotically over the peasants in that sense. He ruled over. He kind of saw himself as protector of the masses and peasants, and therefore that is kind of this is why someone like Richard Pipes is freedom in the was it Property and Freedom? Yeah, I think it's Basic Books, 1999. Offers a fantastic duality of Anglo-Saxon, the rise of Anglo-Saxon political development and the Russian development, and how they really differed, both in terms of civic structure and political rule and economics, property rights, and that these two trajectories worked in a completely different direction, and that's the big and I think even Rousseau understood that by Peter the Great, when Peter the Great wanted to make modern Russia modern, he misunderstood. He botched it in that sense. He never really and that's why the Russian nation has, and Rousseau makes that line in Social Contract saying it's botched. It's never going to be able to be a normal nation because of that. And I think Rousseau may be right on that sense. That if you miss the trajectory, there's a certain moment on the political development, and that if you missed it, then it's sorry, you can't go develop it. You're on a path, and it's the amount of violence that you have to do. I mean, that's the unique. The reason why the French Revolution and was so vicious in the continent was because that the Ancient, the society of the Ancient regime could not stand the Anglo-Saxon. In other words, the American Revolution was a product of the English political culture that was transmitted there. And as Alan McFarlane clearly states in his The Origins of English Individualism, that England, in other words, the way from 1066 onwards, the political development of England was completely different than the continent development of the continent. The sociological dimension of this. By the 11th and 12th century, the English yeoman and the English peasant was far less peasants and far more yeomen. Even if you had the farm class, and these may not be as a middle class, but they were far more like modern society than the view of this landed, slaved, and peasantry that dominates much of the idea of the medieval world. McFarlane does a fantastic job there, and I think people should look at McFarlane's work to understand the uniqueness. And I would read McFarlane with Pines to see the real trajectory of how this really diverges political development. So when you bring the ideas of the revolution of the European continent, particularly France, which has already, because of Louis XIV, centralized political power. So you had a completely already different system of work. The English system of government was yes, the monarchy, yes, there was centralism, but not central administration. You had it. In other words, often the crown devolved authority Now, it was still the crown's authority, but exercised by local agents that the crown appoints or permitted to have the elections or a self-appointment in that sense. In other words, they were either done through like the way town councils, town sections, and maybe even the words that, you know, town bodies, city bodies were, you know, selecting their own people, but they were exercising the authority given to them by the crown. And therefore, if you violated it, if people ignored it, they weren't challenging the authority of the townspeople, the government of the town. They were challenging the crown. You challenge the judge. You challenge not the judge, judicial authority. You challenge the crown. So therefore, you had this very the English model had a complex of centrality of political centralization, but administrative devolution. Now we can look at the modern, but you know what the idiots at, you know, under the Blair did by devolution was not that. They devolved Parliament, not devolved offices, devolved Parliament, giving them a government and giving the, you know, the Scottish executive and the Welsh executive this weird authority. Now, if it was merely just the authority of counties and that, but at the same time not giving the English themselves self-government, this is a kind of hypocrisy. This is the beginning of what I call managerial systems. You can see the mentality of the Blairite system is a managerial government, not democratic government, not sovereign government. So I'm going over the place, but I think this is the point about this, that the evolution of this, if you look at the political development of the model, then you see how that revolution, that English revolution in America, when it hits the European, it forces a social revolution that wants to imitate the American Revolution in that sense, but it can't, because you don't have a wholly civic culture. The revolution has to basically force a civic culture. But then the French Revolution did not give self-government. It basically gave the people control over the French monarchy, the French state, which was a centralized state. And it was essentially, and what the French, I mean, that's why Schmidt's dictatorship is very good about this, is the chapter on the revolutionary councils and the way that the revolution basically, even though elements of the revolutionary people wanted to decentralize the de facto reality of both Napoleon and then the post-Napoleonic era, led to an increased socialization, centralization, administrative centralization. The nightmare that Tocqueville feared in his book, Democracy in America, the fear of administrative decentralization as the really nasty thing of democratic despotism, right? And I think this is what we have to understand in that sense. There is the political development of political culture. Like, culture matters. The political culture shapes that. And the question is, what kind of political culture you have? In Africa, you still have tribal societies. And I would say that, you have this very interesting things. You have, you can have two forms of, you can have tribal societies, tribal family constructions. First cousin marriage, even first cousin marriage, even earlier. Now, the merging of civil societies seeks to maybe say, okay, maybe second cousin marriage or no cousin marriage. So you have this. You have to have the question of family structure, and who's the banning of cousin marriage. At least first cousin marriage. This creates a more common among different people. In other words, if everything is based upon first cousin marriage, then there's going to be a big gap between me and not my cousins. It's me, my family, my cousins, then my neighbors, then that famous outward expanding circles, right? This is how social trust emerges in that sense. That the high levels of social trust emerges on a society which does not see. First cousin marriage produces too excessively homogeneous a population that is not open to outsiders. So therefore, you need to have, in other words, it's that sweet spot, the Pareto optimality moment of homogeneity. If you have excessive homogeneity, it's negative. You start having negative external. You have negative returns on the activity. So there's the homogeneity has a certain sweet point around 80%, between high 50s and like that, which allow that this maximum. This is the maximum utility where homogeneity gives the maximum benefit of things that allows you to have openness. Now, if you have over that, then you get what happens is you don't trust that everyone is bound by are connected and overly close, and therefore are not open to the stranger, non-trusting. And this is the fundamental problem. Now, tribal societies tend to be very highly homogeneous at the high. Now, this is the famous argument. Ethno-nationalism says we should have high homogeneity, right? Oh, that'd be good. No. If you have too excessive homogeneity, you then also have negative. In other words, you have to remember, too much inbreeding is not a good thing. Anything things that interbreed at a certain level, at a high level of family kin-based structures, like purebred animals, like these pure breeds, right? They're dumb. They're weak. They're sick. That's why mutts are better, stronger, healthier, animals that live longer than the dog who's a mutt is going to be smarter and more likely to be able to live longer than the inbred animal. Okay, the inbred animal, the perfectly bred dog is going to be kind of stupid and dumb. Why? Because he's too genetically, in other words, errors will start happening. The same family errors are replicating themselves, and therefore creates problems, diseases, illnesses, weakness. So, natural evolution wants diversity and genetic diversity in that sense. That's the organism wants diversity. That's good. It allows it to be. It gives it greater advantages. Now, but remember, there's a limit. That limit is that if you have there's a certain place where there's pure chaos, where there's there's no place where people feel safe. Everyone is within this fighting thing of minority. Then what happens is then my group is against your group. Then there is no social trust. So social trust happens in this window. High levels of social trust and civic identity have in this window of a certain level above 50%. You have to have a majority, not just mere majority. It has to be higher than mere 50. It has to be high 50s in that sense. So it has to be secure enough. And then, but it can't be too high. If it's above 80s, if it goes in the 90s, then it becomes a little too regressive. It becomes no longer. There's this cutoff point. And this is the way that distinguishes different societies and different structures. I know people are going to say, no, but that doesn't make any sense. Well, sorry, go look at the data from Putnam's the Scandinavian Political Review piece, where he looked at the data about this. And even though he says, multicultural, diversity is good. Diversity is good, but wait a minute. You have to understand the diversity. Yeah, if your choice is complete diversity, no. But if you have in a homogeneous society, you have a level of openness that allows diversity. This becomes advantageous. Diversity. If you have a society that is completely diverse, then there's no advantageousness. Everyone is fighting with each other. There's no common. There's no possibility of a common. There's no going to be the social trust. And the same problem happens at the excessive ends of homogeneity, where you have people who are so similar that that in other words, that even the other family is going to be seen as an enemy. There's no common bond in that sense, in this social, there's no possibility of social trust. This is why peasant societies tend to have very low social trust. It's only in civil society do you have social trust. And we have to understand civil society emerges out of society, civil society in a sense, emerges out of commerce, trade, exchange, division of labor, as Durkheim in his book on division of labor makes a very powerful case for. Modern society, social structures becoming that you can have larger scale societies based upon mutual interdependence, based upon division of labor. They share an interest. It's no longer just mere living together. It's community. The concept of community was that they lived together. They shared something, but living together is a finite space, whereas society is based on exchange, from the Roman conception of soci, right? The soci were people who had arrangements based on interest and agreement, not based upon the fact that we shared a life together. In fact, you could have soci could be the other city over there, and that you could have an arrangement based upon, sometimes hegemonic power, but a lot of time can be also by trade or commerce or mutual defense. Okay. You have alliances, you have agreements, you have based upon it's agreed upon based upon mutual shared interest. Now, this is where libertarians, libertarians will love this conception of this. They always will look at this and say, yep, that's the market and that's the thing. No, that's only one dimension of it. We forget the communal, the family. So that it's this intersection between these two things. And the danger for now political entities, as we get into larger political entities, communities cannot be big. Communities are always intimate size. They're very limited by space and membership. They can't grow too big. They have to know each other. They have to live together. And if it becomes so big that I don't even know you and you're not even possible. In other words, you're so separated that you don't share anything together. Then what happens is there's no common. The common breaks down. The common bond breaks down. That holds the life together breaks down. So that is the thought today. Now, I think I responded to Carlitz's. I didn't see anyone else's put any comments. I'm just a little nervous about certain things about this. One of the things I would recommend is, I'd like to talk about maybe next week, I'll talk about it, would be I'm thinking, what is this name? Carol Quigley's Weapon Systems and Political Stability. I might want to talk about that. That is a very interesting theme. It's available. You can find. It's a big book. I remember it when I first came out. I remember it being a kind of summary. I think I read published the summary version because it came posthumous after he died. He was working on it before he died, and it was published by University Press of America in the TypeScript publishing. I remember that. I remember the original TypeScript of it. It's available on a PDF that's available. It's been reprinted by many. It's like $60 a copy because it's a huge book, hundreds of pages long. um, it is worth looking at because it's a very important hypothesis about military weapons and the citizenry. In other words, the argument is that it's when you have a disarmed population, this tends to be a very unstable population, very easily creates instability, and it can be abused. It's when the citizenry is armed and able to do it, there tends to be a stability. Now, the idea of military grade arms. Now, this is the idea that, in other words, the Second Amendment is not about military. The argument is, well, the Second Amendment is about hunting. No, it's not. It's about the militia, and that the militia are the people. In other words, not the king's retinue or the oligarch's retina. It is in a Republican government or a popular government, it is the people themselves who make up the militia. And therefore, this is the idea of this, that the citizenry make the soldiery. The foundation of the Greek citizen soldier, the hoplites, even the Romans republic citizen soldier in that sense. All of this is the idea about this, and the way you then create and I think this is we can understand you can even understand the rise of English supremacy in much of the early part up until the rise of gunpowder because of the longbow, and the longbow was that the yeomanry. The yeomanry was trained. The English monarchy allowed the yeomanry to arm in ways the French never allowed their peasantry or their non. In fact, there weren't enough yeomans in the French society. It was more peasant based, and that they would not ever arm. They would only conscript and arm in extreme emergency. They didn't trust them, but that's why if they gave them an arm, they gave them a crossbow. In that sense, it was very difficult to maintain. Crossbow was a very difficult. It was not a rapid fire weapon. It was something that you had to really know how to use, and most people could not afford them. Where the longbow was a much cheaper weapon. People could afford it. People could themselves easily afford it. You just need to take practice with it, and therefore, in England, you had the habits. The English crown, constantly encouraged the cities and the towns to engage in training, and in competitions and things like this to train archers. And the English longbow was the reason for English supremacy until the rise of gunpowder, in that sense. With the rise of gunpowder and explosives and cannon, that undid it, and then the rise of fire that broke English supremacy in that sense. Then the rise of the French and the Spanish became that, and then then the evolution of war, the revolutions in war. In other words, the changes in evolution and war fighting and technologies of warfare changed the character of the political systems. Again, that's something like Philip Bobbitt's book Shield of Achilles highlights the interconnection between evolution on economic, technological, and military development with political, constitutional development, and the interconnection between the interaction of these tied to interstate rivalry and warfare led to continually forcing evolution of the political system that developed the European modern state in that sense, and the current political development of the systems in that sense. So you can take Bobbitt's book, Shield of Achilles. We can take Carol Quigley's book on weapon systems and political stability, military weapons and political stability, and then you can then understand the way the political development of certain realities. Now, with the rise of modern weaponry, technical weaponry does not allow. The argument is that do you really want every citizen to have a nuclear bomb? And therefore, what ends up happening is it becomes elite control of armaments. and the disarming of citizenry. That may lead to the eventually dispossession of people and the rise of administrative rule. So that's another dimension of understanding what the rise of the administrative state and the rise of a managerial society. Again, James Burnham book, The Managerial Revolution, it's a little dated and it doesn't get everything. I think in many ways he didn't see, he got the right idea, but he didn't really develop the idea in the right way. So we'll stop here. We're in the hour. I don't want to go too far. It's been long enough. I hope you guys all right. We'll see you next week. Have a good weekend. If you've liked it, hit the like button. So far, one person liked it. We've had a lot of people come and go. I hope to say everything next week. If you follow me on social media, you can do that. Check out the social media links below. If you want to follow my academic stuff and check me out, check out my academic research, you can check out the academic social media links below that. And if you want to help me do what I do, in that sense, you can be a Patreon or Emperor Subscribe Star, or buy one of my books listed that are listed below, the currently available books. Buy it through a online, either your local bookstore, online distributor, or through the publishers themselves. So that's the spiel. I give my spiel. I hope you guys like it. Like the video, like it. Even if you're just liking it after you're watching it after the fact, hit the like button. It helps in the algorithm. Please tell friends to come join. If you're new here, go check things out. Maybe you want to join us. Please subscribe. It helps. We lost one or two people. So I think we gained a couple people and we lost a couple people. We're still like 4 people away from the magic 500 number. The magic 500 number. We've been circling that about a month now, month and a half. This match, we're 10. We were circling the 500 number by 10 points for the last month and a half. So please go encourage people to come join us, watch it, and subscribe. Well, that's it. Take care, and I will see you next weekend, next Friday. Take care. Bye-bye.